Good morning, Saturday cohort. This is your session 9 recording because we're not meeting in person this time. Oh, I guess I should look at my camera. I was looking at my screen. So I hope everybody's doing well. So today I'm going to do a recording of slides and information that pertains to this week for the 4110 curriculum. And then on Saturday, I will be on Teams for the second half-ish of the 2-hour class time, so that if anybody wants to join me on Teams and ask any questions, you may. So we'll still have a voluntary synchronous section to our seminar on Saturday, but for the slides and lecture, we're doing this video, and I'll post it as soon as I can get it up and ready for you. So today we are really going to, let me move my slide. We're going to enjoy that it's happy fall. Happy is spelled wrong. It's not my happy, but I like the picture of the dog and the leaves. So I hope you guys are enjoying the November cool, crisp air that we have just received. So I like to start with this quote because I found it as I was taking a look at particular topics for this class, and it fits so nicely with some of the things that I know our teacher candidates deal with in special education. I'll read it to you, and then I'll kind of share my thoughts. And I hope that as you're listening to this video and watching the video, that you will contemplate what this quote means to you. I might bring it back in our next November seminar and ask your thoughts. But it's by Samuel Beckett, and he says, "Ever tried, ever failed? No matter. Try again, fail better." So I liked this quote because I'm looking at some of the teacher traits that special educators need, and one of them is perseverance, and one of them is self-efficacy, which is the belief that you can make a difference in your students' lives. And so Samuel Beckett's quote really, was poignant for me. And I know that as teacher candidates, many teacher candidates express to me, "Oh, I'm so worried about my grades," or "I don't want to do it wrong," or "I don't want to fail." And actually, I wanted to point out that there are lots and lots of very smart people who say failure is part of the learning process. The struggle to learn, fail, get better, that's where you become the very best student, first of all, and then second of all, the very best teacher you can be. So that's just our grounding for this seminar lecture. And so don't worry so much about the things that you get wrong. Learn from them and do better. So that's the message. So I know this slide says tonight, but this is the Saturday cohort. I forgot to put today, but today we'll just talk for a minute. I'm just going to briefly bring up some observations about the Bibb County IEP review, and then we're going to talk about discipline of students with disabilities. Many of you remember probably that I have been preparing a study session for people who have not taken their GACE exam yet. Some of you in the Saturday cohort already have, so great. But as I did that, I noticed some of the sample questions in the study guide had to do with discipline of students with disabilities. And our program is for licensure in elementary. You don't have quite as much need for an in-depth knowledge about the discipline procedures in special education when you teach elementary. But you do need at least a basic understanding because of the GACE exam, and because who knows, you might teach middle school someday, and you might teach upper elementary where you do have students who are subject to disciplinary procedures. For students with disabilities, the IDEA prescribes certain things that administration must do when we have to use discipline with students with disabilities. So that's what our topic is today, and I hope that everything that'll be on the slides and what I explain as you watch the video will make some sense. Okay, so you did the IEP review, and with my other cohorts, we've been having a little discussion about what was notable about the IEPs. And since this is just a recording, I'm not obviously going to hear from you today about it, but I will be interested to know if you want to comment next time we're together about the Bibb County IEP review. So Bibb County, I have met some of their central office administrators, and they use a random process for area coordinators to review student IEPs so that they can help their schools and their teachers with making sure they meet all the requirements and that they write quality IEPs. Some of my other teacher candidates have expressed that they saw really good IEPs when they did this. They liked the checklist because it gave organization and step-by-step items to look for in the IEP. So just like any other new skill, as you get used to looking at IEPs, you'll recognize things often and quicker, and you will, become expert at it eventually. So this review task that I gave you was simply to have a structured way for you to look at the components of an IEP. So hopefully that was something you found useful and helpful, and it'll also help you as you're completing your TBEEB exercise and assignment. All right, so on your screen, you should be seeing a half of a document that is posted in D2L for you. It is a 2-page document called the Fact Sheet for Discipline by the Georgia Department of Education, and I want you to take a look at it. It's just 2 pages, like I mentioned, and it's a quick read and very clear and understandable, I find. And discipline is an area of the law that is notorious for making principals and teachers and parents concerned and confused about what it all means. And lots of litigation happens around the topic of discipline of students with disabilities. So that's why we're going through this, so that you at least have that foundation of knowledge about the discipline rules. So I'm not going to read this form to you. It's on you guys to read through it. I recommend you download it and keep it. It is written for parents, and so it is in an understandable kind of language. Excuse me. So each school division should have, and really must have, procedures to ensure safety of all students with disabilities and all students in general and all faculty and student and teachers, so that there is a safe learning environment. Okay, so that's a basic understanding. So students must abide by the school division's code of conduct. So basically that's their handbook for how students must comply with the rules of the school division. So each parent and student should be given a copy of the code of conduct at the beginning of the year, and also typically have to sign that they received it. And that's really important because later on, administrators don't want to hear from parents, oh, I never knew that that was the rule. So nobody should be able to say, I didn't know. And the code of conduct signature is supposed to prompt administrators to make sure parents understand, and most administrators will have an assembly for students, or a session, a parent-teacher meeting for parents, so that they can go over the code of conduct. You may or may not have heard of that happening at your school this fall. Hopefully parents were briefed on the code of conduct. So the rest of this page that goes through what in Georgia are the rules for students with disabilities and discipline. I'm going to go over with you through a few slides, and I'm going to pick out the most important things. So there's a lot on this one pager, but there's very big highlights that I'm going to share with you. Okay, so this is a term that was on your acronym sheet that you did. So the manifestation determination review, kind of a mouthful to say. It's the MDR. So sometimes new teachers are concerned and confused by that term. What does that mean? So let's take it apart it's one bullet by one bullet. So once a student has been suspended for more than 10 days in a year, a school year, then this MDR process must be conducted by day 11 of suspension or removal. So this is all because in the IDEA, we have regulations and the statute tells us that we have to afford students with disabilities certain rights around being removed from their special education program. So all children are disciplined and can be disciplined. So sometimes parents think, oh, my child has an IEP, he or she cannot be disciplined, which is not true. They can be disciplined, but the rules say you've got 10 days, but after 10 days, certain procedures must happen. So that's why it says on your screen, the 11th day of suspension. So what happens in this MDR, this manifestation review, select members of the IEP team consider whether the behavior was due to the disability. So let's stop there and talk about that a little bit. So select members of the IEP team. So typically that means at least one general ed teacher, the special education teacher, an administrator, and often a school psychologist is there because you need their expertise at this meeting. So it doesn't have to be everybody on an IEP team, but it needs to be at least those important members, and then the parent and whoever the parent brings with them. So this IEP meeting, which is called the MDR, is convened, and what the team has to do is they have to decide, was the behavior that the child exhibited due to or caused by or manifested of the disability. So that's where the term manifestation comes from. So it basically is a longer, fancier term for caused by. So we're looking for whether or not the student's disability caused that misbehavior that they're being removed for. So that's question one. Was there a causal connection? And then secondly, whether the IEP was written as it was implemented as written, and was the BIP, the behavior plan, implemented as written, if there is one. So you can see, just like we've been talking about all semester, that teachers must abide by what's written in that IEP. It has to happen. So if services are supposed to be 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, there has to be services. So if you get in a situation where a student is being disciplined frequently and we have to do a manifestation meeting, if the teachers and or parents say, little Johnny hasn't been getting his services as written, then that's a problem. So this is what the manifestation team is looking at. Was the behavior caused by the disability, and was the IEP implemented as written? If the decision is the behavior was a manifestation of the disability, then the student goes back to their class. They cannot be removed or suspended if that's what the administration wanted. And the IEP services must continue. If the behavior was not a manifestation or caused by the disability, then the same discipline that would be given to a non-disabled child can be given to the child with the disability. But what has to happen is that we pay attention to the provision of the services for the student with the IEP. If you have a student who is being frequently disciplined or removed from their services, then the IEP team may need to come back together and take a look at the level of services, the goals, supports, or even placement, and make changes, because an indicator of how well something is working for a student could be considered how often they are in trouble or how often they are removed from their service. So think about that, right? Our students have a right to their services. If behavior is getting in the way of the provision of their services, then we need to look at that. So your job as a special educator, if you are employed as the special educator, is to help your administration with this. Make sure that you stay on top of, hey, don't forget, little Johnny has been removed and suspended, already 6 days this year. So we need to be careful if we're getting close to day 10. So again, elementary children, you usually don't have that many problems with this, but as children get older, or students, I should say, get older, there are times when the discipline procedures happen quite a lot. Okay, so recap. The MDR, the Manifestation Determination Review meeting, is conducted by relevant IEP team members when a student is considered for exceeding 10 days of removal, and that's considered a change of placement. If you were to read the regulations about this, it'll use that term, change of placement. So the legal aspect of it is, if we are keeping a student from their services for more than 10 days, then we are changing their placement, and certain requirements and rights for the student kick in at that point. So the MDR team reviews the misconduct or whatever the behavior was, and determines if it was caused by or a manifestation of the disability. During this meeting, you may be thinking, well, how in the world do you figure that out? That's why you often need the school psychologist there, because what the school psychologist often does is pulls out the last time the child was evaluated. So the psychological report, you might be there as the special educator looking at the last time an achievement test was given, and interpreting those results and talking about that with the whole team. So here's an example for you. Let's say that Johnny has in his IEP that he is a student with an emotional behavior disorder, and he's working on using kind words and not using profanity. Right? So, and it says that in his IEP and his BIP. But let's say he's getting referred to the office and kicked out of school a lot because he uses profanity. So what the psychologist and the IEP team is going to look at, well, if we're trying to teach him to use kind words, then really that means it's part of his disability. If it's part of his disability, it could have a causing factor to why he is continuing to use profanity, and therefore it may be caused by his disability, and therefore we should not suspend him for that. We should find another way to work with the student, and it doesn't mean you can't give a consequence, you just can't remove them from their services. So think about this, and what does it mean for us as teachers? So if you're the general ed teacher, it may be that Johnny comes back to class and you continue to work with the specialist, the special ed teacher, your principal, about what are we going to do differently to try to teach Johnny to use his kind words versus profanity. Now, let me give you another example that helps maybe with your understanding of this. So Tourette's syndrome, many of you may already know about that. That is a condition that some children will have, where they have an obsession and use profanity sort of without their control. And so Tourette's syndrome, sometimes students will, blurt out things, and sometimes it's curse words. And so if that's part of the disability, then we can't throw him out of school and get him in trouble because he used curse words. Instead, we need to teach him how to change that if we can through, his education, through working with the family and trying to modify that behavior. So teachers, your role is come to these meetings, talk about what you know about the student, talk about the fact that, yes, the IEP is being implemented as it's written, and then help make the decision. It's a group consensus. It's not just your decision. It's not the parent's decision. It's not the principal's decision. It is a group consensus for whether or not the behavior was a manifestation. Okay, so you can see probably through hearing me describe that a lot of times people have different opinions. So there may be teachers and principals who say, that youngster knows what he's doing and he is using those curse words on purpose, and therefore we should be able to discipline him for that. But then there may be other people, including the parent, who says, he's working on his impulses and his obsessions, and cursing is something that is a habit that he has, and he, his psychological profile is that he can't control it. He's learning to control it, but he's not there yet. So there's this difference of opinion. So manifestation meetings are frequently hard meetings. People don't always agree, and there's sometimes conflict. And so it's important to understand the basics of why it's there. It's in the law so that principals can't just throw out the bad kid, send them home all the time because they don't want to deal with them. So that's why it was put into the law that if a student has a disability, we can't just throw them out of school when it really and truly is part of the disability. So you have to make that decision. And so at first, when you participate in these meetings, it will seem daunting. It'll be hard to decide. But hopefully when you are a teacher faced with these meetings, you'll get some training from your leadership in your district, and you'll learn, as you get experience with it, of how to do these manifestations. And luckily, it's not all on you as a first-year teacher or even a 5-year teacher, right? It's a group, and the administration are the ones who, the principals and directors, they're the ones who guide the team. All right, so one of my favorite authors and speakers is Dr. Ross Greene, and one of the things that he said, some of you remember me saying this about him in your junior year, that he says children do well if they can. So I want you to keep that in mind as you're thinking about the discipline procedures and children with autism or intellectual disabilities or emotional behavioral disabilities or ADHD. Sometimes the students with ADHD are the ones who are subject to these manifestation meetings quite a lot. But so I want you to keep in mind that Dr. Greene reminds us nobody wants to be the kid who's in trouble all the time. And children will do well if they can. And if they're not doing well, it's our job to consider, problem solve, figure out what are we not getting about this child? What can we do different to help this child learn? Okay, so from your PBS class that part of discipline, and we didn't focus on discipline, but part of the PBS process in special education involves doing the functional behavioral assessment. So we're going to talk about that for a few minutes because the regulations around discipline include requirements for FBAs, functional behavioral assessments, and BIPs, behavior intervention plans. So they are part of the law and the regulations. All right, so I have some slides that I've adapted from the Georgia Department of Education. And I gave credit on this slide. Bridget Sill is one of their specialists, and she has several really great slides that I wanted to go over with you. And some of this information you will find familiar, that we went over it in the PBS course. But so first of all, student behavior is communication. What is that student telling you through that behavior? It's especially important with youngsters who can't verbally tell you exactly what's going on. And so, think students with intellectual disabilities, students with autism. So their behavior is their communication. So the FBA process allows us to focus on the reason or the function of the behavior rather than only the behavior. So I'm going to pause and be quiet for a moment. Think about a student you have known. What was he or she communicating to you? So you probably each have a picture in your mind of a student who was a challenge, maybe right now, or maybe in years past, or last semester. So all behavior communicates. That's a core principle that you want to remember as you're looking at discipline and the FBA process. So again, all behavior serves a function and is part of their communication. So what are the steps or actions taken during an FBA? So you learned about this in your PBS class, so let's jog our memories. If you were here with me, we'd have a discussion about what are the things that you do right off the bat when you have concerns about student behavior. And there's lots of places where, well, I should say several places where the regulations require us to do FBAs. So we are going to think about and remind ourselves of that. So when is it required? When the local education agency, LEA, principal, the parent, and relevant members of the IEP team make a determination that the conduct or the behavior was a manifestation. And if it was found to be an MDR or an MD, then we have to do an FBA. Now, Johnny may already have an FBA and a BIP. And so if that's the case, then you document that you're going to review it. But if a student didn't have an FBA or a BIP yet, then you would have to create one. So it says there on the bottom part of this slide, hopefully you're seeing it, a functional behavioral assessment and a BIP must be administered within the past year for any student who is being considered for the Georgia GNETS program or for manifestations. So it's required when the student is being disciplined or when we're going to change to more restrictive placement. And also there's another time when it's required, when the behavior impedes the learning of that child or others. So that's a broad statement. So as teachers, you know that some children's behavior gets in the way often. Now, I'm not talking about the once in a while child, but the behaviors that are impeding learning frequently and consistently, then you want to recommend to your administration and to your lead teacher and your psychologist that, hey, we need to do an FBA because Johnny is really disruptive or he's just not learning and it's impacting everybody in the room frequently. And so, what we always say, right? We need data, data, data. So have your data and say to your school leaders, hey, I need an IEP meeting because we need to do an FBA. So you know that the FBA is that process of gathering more information, and then you often need parent permission because you're going to get new information. If you're just going to review data, you don't have to get parent permission, but I know here in Georgia, they really want you to get parent permission and do new observations and evaluations during the FBA. So what are the pieces of the FBA? We do interviews. So maybe the behavior happens a lot at music class. So you're going to interview the music teacher about that. Maybe it happens a lot in social studies class. So you need the perspective of the social studies teacher. So interviews and then observations of the environments where the behavior happens the most. And let's say it happened in your room, then you're going to ask the psychologist or the counselor to come in and do some observations and really look at the data and analyze how often and how long and what are the triggers for the behavior, and then what are the consequences. So you know from your PBS class, you know, really the ABCs of behavior. We have to look at all of that, and then we decide what we think the function is. So you know also that we analyze the data. You did this, you practiced this in your PBS class, but this gets done also in regards to the discipline process. So even if you are not the teacher of the students with disabilities, or you might be the general ed teacher, you might have a role of collecting data and then helping to analyze it. So you want to make sure that you are tracking antecedents, tracking the behavior, frequency and duration and intensity, and then what is the consequence that's maintaining that behavior. So once you've decided what the function of the behavior is, then you write the BIP, right? It includes positive interventions and strategies and supports to help the child learn a replacement behavior, right? So the IEP team creates the BIP, and parents usually need to sign consent for it. And it addresses those problem behaviors specifically, but not only in a way of what are we going to do when the behavior happens, but what are we going to do to prevent it? And what are we going to do to teach something else for the child to do? So in my scenario of the child using profanity, you may remember I said he needs to work on using his kind words. So that's the replacement behavior, using different language. Or maybe the replacement behavior is requesting a break when you feel yourself so frustrated that you want to use cursing. So you teach the behavior based on what that child's function is and the circumstances about when, where, and how intense it is. So it can include instructional modifications, behavior signals and precursors. You might change your routines in your classroom. You've probably heard me say this before, you want to give the student choices. So giving choices is an evidence-based practice that has been proved to really work well with children who are working on impulse control and behaviors. You want to have clear expectations like you do for your whole class, but especially for your students where you need to work on their behaviors. And then pre-correction, you learned about that in the PBS class, but so that's reminding the student at the beginning of a class lesson, hey, Johnny, remember we're going to be sitting on the carpet today and listening to a story, and I'm really going to be looking to see how well you sit and are quietly listening and using kind words. And if you can do that for the 10 minutes that we're doing this story, then I'm going to give you an extra point on your point sheet. Right? So that's called pre-correction. You're setting the child up for what you're going to do when you are able to see the behavior that you're teaching. All right, so you guys know progress monitoring. So when you have a BIP, you also progress monitor the student's performance. And so you will want to be a part of the team deciding who's going to do what. Who's going to keep data periodically in this class? Who's going to analyze the data? Who's going to document everything? So good BIPs have a list of who's doing what. And then also a timeline to reconvene, to get back together and make sure that the BIP is on track. And sometimes the BIP is not working well and it needs to be tweaked. Some students need a crisis intervention plan, and that's really specific for the student who is physically aggressive. And if you have students like that, most of the time, relevant staff are trained in, response de-escalation strategies. And I know Bibb and Houston County, they use mindset as their training. And so if you get the opportunity to go through the mindset training, really hope you will do it. And I recommend that you do it. It's great training because it helps you not only with what to do after an incident happens, but before, how to prevent and what to do instead. All right, so you guys have probably heard me say this before, but part of student behavior is also our behavior as the adults. So manage yourself, avoid sarcasm, always use positive praising, right? Earning systems, not losing systems, work far better. Now, are there some okay systems like Class Dojo that work? Yes, but for a student who is triggered frequently by the losing of something, you want to flip it and always be concentrating on the positive. Don't let them see you sweat, right? Cardinal rule of teaching. And I know I have this hunch that all of you in the Saturday cohort are good at this, but don't let them see you get upset if you can help it. Now, sometimes we're all human. It happens, but try not to let them see your emotion. Give yourself a timeout if you need it. Right? Work together with colleagues and whoever is in your classroom with you if you are fortunate enough to have a para in your room. Also, lastly, never place yourself physically in the way of an aggressive student. So some of you have heard my story before, but just briefly, I was a young teacher and I had a student who was challenging me, and we got into a power struggle. Also a cardinal rule, don't do it. Don't get into power struggles. But, I was young and inexperienced, but this student said, I am leaving this classroom. And I said, no, you're not. And she sure enough did. It was a girl, and I was standing in the way. Now, luckily, I didn't get hurt. Nobody got hurt. But she pulled me and the door open so that she could escape. And, afterward, I had to call the principal. I had to say, so-and-so is out in the hallway. We've had an incident. It was just a bad situation. And I was embarrassed that I had let it get to that point. And so that's just a cautionary tale. Don't let yourself get emotional or get into those power struggles. There would have been another way I could have handled it. Like I could have said, Darlene, it is your choice right now. If you leave the room, now you know that you don't have permission to leave. If you make that choice and leave, then there will be a consequence. I will have to call the principal and say that you have left the classroom. So I hope you will stop and think and make a choice that is a better choice. The better choice would be, why don't you go over to the timeout, calm down corner and hang out for a few minutes, and then I'll check in with you, right? But instead, I got into this, yes, you're going to do what I say mode, and it did not go well. My principal was very understanding. I was still emotional after school that day with the principal and boo-hooing about it, and he was very kind, and he said, you know what, just forget about it. Now you've learned what not to do. So there you go. Now, going down. Now, this slide is from the Georgia specialist. So there are some things that are pitfalls that she calls for fidelity, or when BIPs and FBAs are not done well. Sometimes we're not good at matching the function. So that's a problem sometimes. Number two, we might be thinking that it's a willful behavior when really it's a performance deficit. The student does not know what to do. So think about it as a skill or performance deficit. And then number three, absence of critical environment variables. So, use your power to rearrange what's going on in that environment. I mean, it might be the gymnasium, might be your classroom, might be recess, look at the environment and how can you control the environment in your FBA BIP. And then sometimes we have inaccessible reinforcement. So what that means is if we're expecting a student with very, very poor delayed gratification ability, right? So impulsive, ADHD, or even autism, they can't function on a reward or reinforcer that's going to come at the end of the week. If it's Monday and I've already lost it, then there's no way I can wait till Friday and earn a reward, right? So you want to look at, some students need reinforcement very, very frequently, especially in the beginning of a BIP. All right, so I mentioned GNETs before, but the Georgia Network of Educational and Therapeutic Support. So there is a location of GNETs in Macon called Elam Alexander Academy. And so that's a special school for students who have either autism or emotional behavioral disorder that is so severe that they can't make it in the general ed classroom. And so I just wanted to make sure you had an understanding of what GNETs is. And then don't be the teacher that wags her finger at students, right? Don't take it personally when you're, talking to students and they are rude back. View it as a learning error. So Lewis and Hatton and Jorgensen and Maynard said that quote. I like that quote. It's just a reminder, right? Don't take student behaviors and their words personally, because when a person is upset, they're likely to say things they don't really and truly mean. So don't take it personally. Instead, look at it as a problem that is a learning error, and you have to figure out how to help that student with that learning. All right, so we are done with the mini lecture. Again, I said at the top of the video that I am going to be online on Saturday in a Teams link, and I'm going to post it in the announcements. And I will be available if anybody wants to come on and talk about any of the information I shared or your assignments. You'll do also, it's not due until the following week. The last article in your course pack, you need to do a jigsaw. And so you guys can do it as a group. And at random, I selected a group leader, and Amber was it. I took all the names and pulled a random name, and Amber won. So Amber, all you have to do as a group leader is set up a time when all 5 of you can meet and discuss the article. And then it's the last article by Rossetti et al., Developing Collaborative Partnerships with Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Families During the IEP Process. And so what is your task? So everybody read the article ahead of time. Highlight 3 important ideas, and then when you come together, Amber's going to set up a time for you all to come together virtually. Then you discuss what you all found to be the 3 important highlights of the article. Then number 2, you're going to answer the guiding questions that are in the article, and they're also in the assignment portal. And then lastly, you're going to identify 6 components of collaborative partnerships. All you have to do is list them. You don't have to describe them, just list them. So the actual written part of the assignment is pretty brief. What I hope you really do is read the article and really look for good aspects of what these authors are telling you are best practice and talk about it. Okay, everybody should type up their answers to these 3 tasks and upload it into the assignment portal, where I have the assignment listed, and these 3 things are listed there. And the due date, I don't have the due date up, you guys, but I think the due date is the 12th, I believe, of November. So I'll double check that, and it'll be in your announcements. So in your announcements, you will have the link to the YouTube video of these slides, and you will have, what else will you have in the link? Just when this assignment is listed in the assignment portal with the due date. Okay, so certainly think through everything that I've shared with you on this video slideshow, and jot down questions and join me on Saturday afternoon with whatever questions you have about discipline or about culturally linguistically diverse families or anything in our course. So thank you for watching the video, and I will see you soon.